let's talk about the topic of casting for this assignment. This is dealing with casts between one data type and another for variables. We're going to use this file for the assignment. It's called linked list _ casting data types with SimCity. Our properties are all going to be things that can be the types of things that can be found in the SimCity game. So we'll work through these variables and learn some things about casting. There's actually two types of casts in general, those between primitive data types and those between objects. So I've got two sections of global variables that deal with this. One is for primitive data types, and then one will be for several object data types. So we're going to take the first section here and talk about this. I'm actually going to break this video into two parts, one dealing with the primitive variables and then one dealing with the object variables. Okay, and I think that'll make it easier to understand and grasp, although the amount of work that's in here is all done inside the main method, and I don't think it's going to amount to a whole lot of work. I just want to make sure you understand it, and I think that's going to take me two, hopefully not very long, videos to explain getting through this file and the two different types of casting, just to kind of cut down on the size, the length of either video. Okay, so the first part's going to be the primitive variables section. These are global variables. You've got a little section that has a couple of bytes and a couple of ints. You've got a little section that has a couple floats and a couple doubles. You've got a section that has several. You've got 4 long variables here, and then you've got 4 that are Booleans, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. Those are kind of special. So in these, we know Java has 8 different types of primitive data types, 4 that are integer-based, byte, short, int, and long, and we've got 2 that are decimal number-based, float and double. And we've got then we've got the char, which is a single letter, and the Boolean, which is strictly true or false. Okay, so in order of memory capacity, byte is the smallest of the integer data types, and after byte comes the short, and then the int, and then the long is the largest data type. They each double in size. A byte is actually 8 bits, or 1 byte of data that it can hold, and our first one right here holds 125, and that's actually just shy of its maximum amount of 127 positive. It goes from negative 128 to positive 127 in its capacity of memory storage. Okay, it includes 0, and that's why you're 1 short on the positive side. Okay, so an int is considerably bigger, and of course a long is quite large. Okay, float and double, you've got the float that is a decimal variable, and then the double, which is twice the memory capacity of the float. So that's a quick explanation of the primitive data types. Okay, and that's what we're dealing with here. Okay, so that's what we've got, and we're going to work with changing some of these variables into different data types and putting their values into other variables of different data types. And that's not something that Java does just normally or that it takes lightly. It's very conscious of how much memory is devoted to a variable, and it's very secure with that. It does not want any incompatibilities from one data type to another. Okay, so I'm going to drop through the rest of the global variables, past the object section, and go down to the main method, which is where all the things that I'm going to ask you to do are. They're strictly in the main method. You should not need to change anything in the global properties section. Okay, there is another section below the main method. The main method is a pretty good sized section. Okay, but it ends right here, and there are some methods down below here that we'll deal with when we look at the objects, but you should not need to change those at all either. Okay, so you're strictly you only need to really work inside the main method for this assignment. Okay, so the first section is part 1, and I've got some directions in the comments here, and this is dealing with the primitive variables that are global. Okay, and I've got 6 tasks here, right here. They're numbered. The first one I've done, and we're going to talk about 2 different types of casts among the primitives, at least. And at this point, we're talking about a cast from a smaller data type or a less memory capable data type to a larger data type, for instance from a byte to an int, and they each have a comment with them that explains what they're going from and what they're going to, okay, as far as data type goes. So this first one is converting a byte to an int. That's what we call a widening cast right here in the comment. Okay, so I've created a new variable to handle this. The one that we're going to deal with is crude oil barrel. Okay, and that variable is up here at the top in the global section, crude oil barrel, and you can see it's a byte and its value is 125, and it is a byte. Okay, so right down here, crude oil barrel is a byte. I'm creating a new variable here, and they're all set up for you. Okay, that is an int, and it has the same name as the byte version of this variable, crude oil barrel, except that it has appended to it _int, so that we know this is the int version variable for crude oil barrel. Okay, this is a widening cast. That means this data type that it's coming from is a byte. It's a smaller capacity data type than the one that it's going to. So we don't need any special syntax for this. We just simply use the assignment operator, the equal sign, to assign the smaller value, data type value to the larger one, and it just takes it. There's no error here. Java just does this what's called implicitly. It's implicit, it's implied. There is no special syntax for this. Okay, this does not cause an error. It's fine. It's done just in the assignment. All right, so I'm asking you to do, I've done the first one here. This is the cast. This is the line that's going to have the cast on it. There's 2 lines for each of these tasks, 2 lines of code, 2 statements for each of these 6 tasks I'm having you do. Okay, the first one is actually the cast itself. I need you to set up, and that's really the only thing you need to do for each of these 6 things. Okay, the second line is a system out print line statement, and what it's going to do is output the name of the variable, the new name of the variable, and its value, so you can see what it is. And then it should output this little code right here is some special code that you don't need to change, but it should output the name of the type of data that you're dealing with in the new recently casted to variable. Okay, so in this case it's going to be an integer or an int. Okay, I'm doing some additional casting right here with what are called primitive object wrapper classes, and an integer is one of those, but you don't need to do anything with that right now at all for this assignment. Okay, so this should output. I'm gonna run this. Let's make sure it's saved. It is. Run it, and we should see the first one at the very top here, or right at the top. Implicit cast of byte to int, crude oil barrel _int. There's the variable name. The value is 125. The data type is this, and it gives the long name for the class that it's a data type of, class Java Lang, and it's an integer. Okay, and this is really not, this variable right here is still a primitive. I am just showing you, if it were wrapped as an object, it would be an integer or an int. Okay, so that's just something for me to know, that I can tell from this right here if this is correct and this does not kick out an error and cause your program to fail. Okay, then I know that you got it correct. I know you got the cast right. Okay, if this is correct, if this says integer or whatever the data type is that you're dealing with as a primitive, then I know you did the cast right. Okay, so going back up here to these 6 little tasks. Okay, on number 2, you've got a line here, and I've temporarily assigned this just a 0. But what I want you to do is write the cast for this. Okay, and that is simply going to be to take the jackhammer data type, which is right here, okay, and it's an int. I want you to take that data type, that variable of that data type, and bring it down here and use it right here in place of the 0. Okay, and you're going to you'll notice here that we're casting from an int to a long. So I've created a long version of that variable, jackhammer underscore long. It's a long data type, and we're going to cast from the int to the long. So you see there's no error here. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for 2 and 3. Okay, there's just 2 things for you to do right there for implicit casts. They're just making assignments. Okay, I'm going to take this back to 0 and leave it for you to do. Let's look at the next section and the next type of cast that can be done with primitives, and this would apply in some ways for sure to objects as well. Okay, it's a different way of looking at casts. Okay, implicit casts. Explicit casts are casts that go from a data type that is larger to a data type that is smaller. That one you have to force. That one you have to explicitly write syntax for. And this is what it looks like right here. So we've got this pharmaceutical property here that's an int. Okay, it's got a value in it of 1,825, and we're going to take that and force it into a byte. Now this data type right here as an int is quite a bit larger than a byte, and that number 1825 is way too big to go into a byte. A byte only goes up to 127, negative 128 to 127, but this is way too big. Okay, so we have to force it. We have to tell it we want it to do this. And this is the typical syntax for a cast right here. You put the data type that you want to cast to inside a set of parentheses, and you put it just prior, immediately prior to the name of the variable or the instance. In this case, since it's a primitive, it's a variable name that you want to cast from. Okay, so you're going to cast this int pharmaceutical, byte. Int, 1825 is a pretty big number. You're going to cast this int called pharmaceutical to a byte. Okay, so that's an explicit cast. You have to tell it. It won't do it without it. This would cause, that's an error. Okay, that's an error, and it says, the error says type mismatch, cannot convert from int to byte. You have to explicitly tell it to do it. Okay, so I've created the byte here. We know this is a new variable, pharmaceutical underscore byte, and we're going to assign this value into it. Okay, now what's going to happen here, and this is kind of strange, okay, but the byte will only hold 256 bits of data. That's 8 bits. Or it's 1 byte of data, okay, and it will hold 256 possibilities. 128 is the 127 is the maximum positive number it'll hold. It'll hold 256 options, but including 0 and spreading those out over negative numbers, it'll only go up to 127 positive. Okay, so this data gets forced into here. Now it's not gonna. It doesn't just take 127 and convert it to the maximum that could possibly be for a byte. It takes this number, this 1825, and divides it. Divide it by 256, and you get this. Now, what's left over is going to be 33. Okay, 33 is the remainder, and that's what actually gets assigned to this value, and you'll see that in just a second. In fact, I think you can probably see it on the output that we did right here. Right there, it's 33. Okay, so that it gets the remainder of what's left over after you divide it by the maximum memory capacity of the data type that you're casting to. Okay, so it's a little bit of an odd, you don't really need to remember that necessarily. Okay, but I do want you to know this syntax right here with particularly with the parentheses. You have to do it explicitly. Okay, so these other two are going to be done the same way. This will output the data. Okay, the value. It'll output the name of the variable, and it tells you that it's a byte. Okay, so it should tell you that. That should work. If that should output properly if you get your cast right. These are not very hard to do. Okay, the other two are the same way. Replace the 0 with what would be the cast for this one. Fire department system _int. The fire department, we're going to cast from a long to an int. Fire department system is up here, right here, as a long. It has a pretty big number. Not a huge number, but a pretty big number. And we're going to cast that to an int down here. Right here. Okay, so I got an int created, newly created to receive the value, and I want you to replace this 0 with the cast. It's going to be and it'll look something like that. Okay, so I'm going to let you do that, and the third one will be, or the sixth one will be the same way. Okay, so that's going to wrap up for this. This is casting between primitives, and we're using the linked list _ casting data types with SimCity file to do this.